Okay, this is part 2 on the Phoenicians and what they have brought to humanity. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, you can go to the very end of this, although it may be a 3-parter. Regardless, in the top left-hand corner, it'll go to the next part. The very last one will go back to the first part, or you can go to the site and pull it up and watch it there. So we were talking about the extent of their travels and where the Phoenicians have possibly gone, and so I just got to sarcastically throw in there again that they know that the Greeks got their language from them and there was constant contact with them, but whenever they draw this, they don't make any connection whatsoever. Am I right? And we've found Roman trawlers with a bunch of Phoenician stuff and Phoenician, Roman, all that. No, not gonna do that. Not gonna do it. Found Phoenician boats in the Black Sea now. Yeah, some of those boats that are down there that have been there forever that they just found with Bob Ballard and all this type of stuff that are hardly rotted at all in a anoxic zone, down being kept somewhat in there. That is not gonna go, huh? Not even gonna draw a line there. Because if they did, you'd start realizing, yeah, they used to control the whole Mediterranean, and they had cities all around, and cities all around here too. A lot of people make connections to the Etruscans, although linguistics and certain things don't make that connection totally. But then again, Minoans and Greeks and stuff, and it's all a connective of a pretty much common people in the first place. And if you take that back a couple of steps, like I've quite often showed, the Proto-Indo-European linguistics would get them to a point where there's pretty much sprechen sie Deutsch and understand each other. And where certain names come from, like Jupiter is Dios Pater. And that can go all the way from Sanskrit stuff way over here, all the way to over here. And Peter and Potter, and how that works all together, but let's continue. So that's a map of the trade routes, or at least kind of maybe half of them. Did the Phoenicians come together as a nation? Well, we do not know whether the Phoenicians had shared identity, and if they considered themselves as a single nation. Nevertheless, we do know that they established city-states which were politically independent. And that's very much like the Sumerians, and how they had somewhat independent states from each other, and special gods, though they had the group in the pantheon. This was the major one here, and this was the major one here, and it was kind of hooked up in that hokey way, if you will, but hey, it made it click and work real good. And the same type of thing is seen in the Phoenicians, to where they had variations on a theme, because there wasn't one overruling power, for there was a duke in each one of the provinces broken up, and allowed that to happen. And because each one was independently somewhat wealthy, boom, and you can just about bet that they got the dealer price on everything, except for the kings maybe. The rise of these Phoenician city-states occurred around the 12th or 11th century BC, and of course this comes out of the Bronze Age collapse and everything that we've talked about a couple of videos about. And around this time, the old powers that dominated the region, i.e. the Egyptians, owning it all the way up into Anatolia, or reaching into it, or the Hittites, reaching all the way back down into it, were all but weakened or destroyed. Egypt weakened. Hittites pretty much disintegrated into its bits. For instance, the arrival of these sea peoples led to the decline of the new kingdom in Egypt, while the Hittite Empire was breaking up around that same time. And I could go on for an hour, but I did a video about the Hittites recently, and I've done at least 3 videos talking about the Bronze Age collapse and what went on, and also the Marna period, and Sesostris and his campaigns up through there. One of them's got some pretty funny bits in it, but let's continue. The Phoenicians seized the opportunity to fill the power vacuum left behind by these empires by establishing their own city-states. It seemed that each city-state was ruled by a monarch whose power was limited by a powerful oligarchy. And so they rose up out of this. And because why? Well, they were in the middle of everything. They were the ones that were making it happen. In fact, it looks like the trade trying to shut down because of wars against certain people and tried to keep the wheel from turning in faraway lands and there caused a collapse, allowing for people to, in those faraway lands, want to come here and try to get the food because they know you have it. And here's this big shift that goes on, i.e. the sea people. You see some of those guys come in and they've got a helmet very much like the other ones, but they got the little horns on them, which doesn't really remind you of the Vikings so much, but it reminds you more of the Zeke helmet from the 60s and 70s and people riding choppers, and they would have that type of helmet. The Phoenicians seized that opportunity, though. And so, in addition, there's no evidence that the cities banded together into a federation until the Punic Wars and stuff, and that was a grouping, and they didn't get everybody together for that. If they did, it might have gone a whole lot different. But instead, they operated independently. Among the most notable Phoenician city-states were Tyre and Sidon and Bibulus. Tyre, of course, named for its original name, Bibulus, which we get the Bible's name from, but also that's really books and paper writing, which is another invention from them. But then Sidon, and you get Poseidon, and the ancient god of the sea, and these people had taken over and killed the ancient Leviathan Yam serpent and taken control. You have Master of Beasts. These people were masters of the sea by far. Bibulus, known today in Arabic as Jabal, which is like Jabal, is located about 30 kilometers or 20 miles to the north of modern-day Beirut. Its history stretches way back before its rise as a powerful Phoenician city-state during the 12th century BC. Most of the times when they mention this, they don't mention Baalbek and how Baalbek had it really going on and had been destroyed and then rebuilt again by the Romans later. And then we look at the ruins and wow, the Romans, and it's like, no, this was, you can tell by the way the walls are done, this is all rebuilt out of stuff. And those trilithon stones are just, gosh. Bibulus is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, and according to archaeological evidence, it was settled by human beings as early as the Neolithic period. By the 4th millennium BC, Bibulus had grown into an extensive settlement. Bibulus became the main harbor from which cedar wood was exported to Egypt. As a result of this, the city developed into an important trade center. Well, there's Neptunes settlements that come up before that, and we've looked at a lot of that too, so you can kind of see what blends and comes together as a people. Byblos became an Egyptian dependency during the first half of the 2nd millennium BC and maintained close ties with Egypt in the following centuries. With the decline and subsequent collapse of the Egyptian New Kingdom during the 11th century BC, Byblos became the leading state in Phoenicia. And so they were freed from it and no longer paying off anything extra, but also they were put in a prime position. This made a lot of people angry about them. You can see stories in the Bible where they call them even Satan himself and say, oh, how you were incredible, but you tried to go so high and fell so low. So what ends up coming out of that is kind of alluded to straight. By around 1000 BC, however, Byblos was eclipsed by two other independent Phoenician city-states, Sidon and Tyre. Like Byblos, Sidon, known today in Arabic as Saida, was already an ancient city by the time it became an independent city-state. And these go back way, way in time. But of course, Jericho goes back incredible. And all these cities in that area and these people are all kind of Canaanites. Kind of the Phoenicians. Sure, there was a lot of trade going through and stuff, but we're really still looking at pretty much the same people. Sidon was established during the 3rd millennium BC and prospered in the following millennium as a result of trade. On the other hand, Tyre, known today in Arabic as Sur, was probably originally founded as a colony of Sidon. Like Bibulus, Sidon, Tyre too became an independent city-state when the Egyptians lost their grip over that region. And so they grew so big that they were independent of themselves and became states, like in the American states. And this one is Tennessee, and this Kentucky, and I'm Louisiana. But we've got a capital, we've got all these other cities, we got that, we got this, and we're still in our own independent city-states. Are you still united? Well, yeah. Since everybody, there's no one person kind of over all of it, not so much. In Tyre suppressed Sidon is the most important Phoenician city-state, as it traded and established with its own colonies in other parts of the Mediterranean. According to tradition, the famous city of Carthage was established as a colony of Tyre in 814 BC. Carthage also means the new city, and so they say 814 BC, but it's kind of well known that they were already hanging out there before, but they didn't come on and build this new city port. But that hooked harbor that they had there was probably a shelter and a layaway spot whenever they're going across North Africa from place to hop and hop and hop, like we just looked at that map. Long before they took a large group of people there and built the city, which here's just some of the ruins of Carthage and how well it was built for its time. Both Sidon and Tyre were also mentioned frequently in the Old Testament. For instance, the king of Tyre, Hiram, is recorded as providing Solomon the materials required for building the temple in Jerusalem. And he's found out through Masonic things all the way through to this Hiram Abiff. This equates. It's the same concept that gets carried on. Well, who is he? Well, he was the king of Tyre. But oh, great king of Tyre, and da-da-da, have you fallen? And they even call him Satan. Well, Satan means adversary. They were the great merchants of the time. In the time after the Babylonian and then Cyrus released him. Yeah, but then of course that was getting taken over back and forth too, and screwing everything up with the Persians and then the Greeks and Macedonians and Alexander the Great coming through. So really just kind of whoosh, 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 and stirred up a bunch of dust, and whenever it cleared, people going, who did what? The Phoenicians lose their independence. Well, the Phoenician city-states were not able to hold on to their independence for long. The wealth of these city-states must have attracted the attention of foreign powers. During the 8th and 7th century BC, the Phoenician city-states came under the rule of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. In 538 BC, Phoenicia was conquered by Cyrus the Great and came under Persian rule. Although the Phoenicians had lost their independence, their cities continued to flourish after that point because of the way Cyrus ran everything. But due to their expertise in seafaring, the Phoenicians supplied ships for the Persian kings. Persian rule over Phoenicia ended during the 4th century BC when the region fell under Alexander the Great. One of the major battles of Alexander's campaign against the Persian Empire was the Siege of Tyre, which occurred around 332 BC. As the naval base of the Persians, Alexander knew that it would be unwise to leave it in the hands of the enemy as he continued his campaign southward. So he's done kicked their butt here, but he's going to leave them behind with all of that. And so he went after him. He was also aware that Tyre would not fall so easily, as it was situated on an island off the mainland and was heavily fortified. So it's kind of like Pharaoh's Island or whatever, just separated right there off a little bit. Therefore, he requested permission to offer sacrifices to the temple of Melkart, who's kind of the Phoenician god identified with the Greek Hercules. And we talked about how that kind of connected just a minute ago. In the hopes that he would be allowed to enter the city. Alexander's request was rejected. So he sent heralds to issue an ultimatum to the Tyrians. Well, surrender or be conquered, he said. In response, the Tyrians killed the heralds and threw them off the city walls to their death. Which, that didn't set too well, and so they continued. Again, so we look at another picture here, and this is apparently Alexander the Great and his people here, and you can see there's a shield which already has a horse on it, where the horses come from. That's Pegasus. Yep, he's in the clouds. Pegasi, he's definitely there. But there's also a guy who's been shot by these heavy arrows right here. And if I go down a little bit, you'll see that there's a heavy arrow stuck in this board real deep and so on. And there's people down below here in the galley, in the places you might row out the holes, but they've got a ballista that's in there, which is really like a crossbow that's pretty big. In fact, you can see them turning a wheel right here, right there, cranking the thing back, clink, 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 and then boom, letting it go. But there's also a guy that looks, Celtic, right there, definitely. But, so were there Celts with them too? I've shown a video where there's Celts with them and with the Egyptians and so on. They're well known. The people getting around a whole lot more than people give credit for. But also, this guy's been shot through with by those big arrows. And you see this thing over here. Well, somebody shooting those ballistas over 100, 150, 200 yards, lobbing them in here. And those ballista bolts are basically something the size of a spear with some arrow fletching on the back of it, and got a lot of thump to it. Went right through his midsection. Caught one in his chest too. Sucks. Looks like there's some advisors going on here, like, how are we going to ever do this? Well, what they decided to do was build all the way up to it. But let's get into it here. Siege of Tyre. Enraged by the Tyrians' defiance and killing his people off, Alexander proceeded to besiege the city. Due to the lack of a naval force, the Macedonians were able to assault the city directly. Instead, engineers began building a causeway connected to the island to the mainland. The Tyrians, in turn, sought to hamper the construction of the causeway, which was successful until the arrival of a fleet of ships from Cyprus, as well as those that defected to Alexander from the Persian ships that they already had there themselves. And so that allowed them enough to start building it on, and they couldn't hold it back. When they got closer, ballista bolts, and that's what you were kind of seeing here. Eventually the causeway was completed, and the Macedonians stormed and captured the city. The entire siege lasted 7 months. Still furious with the Tyrians after the whole frustration, Alexander executed about 10,000 of the city's inhabitants, while another 30,000 were sold into slavery. And I could go off and make connections to something, but let's just go ahead and... In the years following the death of Alexander the Great, Phoenicia was one of the regions fought over by the Seleucids and the Ptolemaic dynasties, two of Alexander's successors. During this time period, the Phoenicians were gradually Hellenized, and their original identity was slowly being replaced. Finally, Phoenicia was incorporated by Pompey as part of the Roman province of Syria in 65 BC. After that time, there was a whole lot of dispersal. Although the Phoenicians disappeared from the pages of history, they are still remembered today as expert seafarers and merchants. This reputation, however, pales in comparison to the greatest contribution made by the Phoenicians to the modern world, the alphabet. Like much of the Middle East during that time, the Phoenicians used a script known as cuneiform, just like the Sumerians and Egyptians did. So here's that connection, and the Hittites. which originated in Mesopotamia, they tell you. But by around 1200 BC, the Phoenicians had developed their own script, their own shorthand. A is for apple, B is for ball. Ta-da! People think that they may have done this to mark certain deals and just using the first name parts of people's names, words and stuff on each one so they'd know. This was, yeah, for Egypt, they would just, have a couple of symbols and they would know that. Phonetics. The earliest known example of the Phoenician script is found on the sarcophagus of Hiram, which is very much like Hiram Abiff, which was discovered in Bibulus. The Phoenician alphabet was later adopted by the Greeks, who kept some characters while removing others. The Greek alphabet was in turn adopted by the Romans, resulting in it spreading all across Europe. Additionally, the Phoenician alphabet was considered to be the basis of other Middle Eastern as well as Indian alphabets, either directly or indirectly. Proto-Indo-Europeans, etc. And so here we see that sarcophagus of Hiram, as in a Hiram Abiff, but it definitely has Sumerian iconography all over it, but also elephants with tusks and connections that are a little bit odd. End pedestals on it, but it's a sarcophagus. So, surely I've left out a few things, ballista and so on, but you can imagine what they passed around to people. Knowledge that they were able to pass around to people as they met them and had merchant trade with them. They would have a stay over for a few days, I'm sure, revelry and talking about things. And well, sure that, Herodotus and people got duped by silly stories sometimes. Sometimes you could think that the silly stories they even believed themselves sometimes. Others, it was probably meant to dissuade them from even thinking that they were having contact and merchant contact with them. Like ancient stories of griffins and so on that they knew, and they knew where that came from. And Amazons, and there was a counterpart to those Amazons right down in North Africa too. Yeah. In fact, those Berbers are also known as the Amazigh, and that has to do with it. And there's still a remnant of these people in North Africa, in that area, right over near Morocco, that haven't been admixed out, and they still have red and blonde hair and blue and green eyes. Done a couple of videos on it and mixed it in with videos about the Moors and who that originally was, but that's another video altogether. So I'm going to get on to another video where a guy's recreated the die, and it's got a couple of other reveals in it maybe, and we'll take a look at that. Y'all like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.